All right, hello everybody. Today's review is going to be of Godless, which is a series that I've actually watched for the first time just for myself. I think I was kind of like in and out of the reviews at that point in time, and just yeah, wasn't doing my reviews at that point in time. But now that I am, I actually did review this over on Instagram. I think maybe about a year ago, at least. It's got to be at least a year ago. Anyway, but unfortunately, Instagram again only goes to like the 15-minute videos, so I definitely went over the allotted time because this is there's quite a lot to talk about in this series, and so I took notes. I think I might have taken notes last time, I can't really remember, but anyhow, now that I have a legitimate notebook, it's much easier to take notes anyway, but we'll go over the cast list first, and I gave the show 9 out of 10 if I didn't already say that, I can't remember, but I think I did. So Jack O'Connell, who played Roy Good, and this was the first thing that I actually saw Jack O'Connell in, and since then he's been in Sinners, and there's something else he's been in too that I really enjoyed him in. But yeah, he was just a very standout actor in this show. Then we had Michelle Dockery, who played Alice Fletcher, Scoot McNairy, who played Bill McNew, Merritt Weaver, who played Mary Agnes or McNew. So Agnes was her married name, and then obviously she was Bill's sister. Thomas Brody Sangster, who played Whitey Wynn, Tonto Cardinal, who played Iovi, Jeff Daniels, who played Frank Griffin, and I cannot say enough about him in this show. Just as a villain, I was not expecting it at all. Like, he just played the part so well, and knowing Jeff Daniels is like more of a comedian from like the Dumber and Dumber movies. Now, I believe he's been in obviously some more serious shows, so I guess I've kind of missed maybe that side of his career, I suppose, because I've only ever seen him in like a few things, and they've all kind of been comedic. So yeah, I guess I guess I've never really seen that side of him before, but he did such a very like good job of being an evil guy who was just very scary and kind of just like he had a good side to him also, but he definitely went about it the wrong way in certain situations, that's for sure. Like, he wanted to help, but he also definitely had a darker side to him. So yeah, very a very layered character, I would say, for sure. Adam David Thompson, who played Gats Brown, who was, as far as I was concerned, kind of Frank Griffin's like right hand man, basically, and you could kind of see that from like the very beginning, like even in the flashbacks and stuff. Like, you could see that he was there with him for a very, very long time. So yeah, basically his right hand man, and I mean his gang, or I guess posse, whatever you want to call it, I suppose, or the people that just followed Frank Griffin or that he let in, just continued to seem to like grow in numbers because he was just so very welcoming, and now he kind of almost at certain points showed some weakness, but I mean, I think he could tell that maybe some of the guys were kind of after him in a sense, but he never really wanted to truly show that he was 100%, not the leader. So he always tried to make himself tougher than he actually was, I think. Um, and yeah, like the whole complex thing about him knowing when his death was going to happen. And I mean, this man had some serious luck in this show. I will give him that for sure. And then we had Joe. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, I guess. Then we had Joe Pingu as Alonzo Bunker, who was also part of Frank's gang. Keith Jarden, who played Dyer Howe. Yeah, he, like most of these guys that I'm listing, were in his gang. Rio Alexander, who played Bud Ledbetter. Sorry. Russell Dennis Lewis, who played Daryl Devlin, and then Matthew Dennis Lewis, who played Donnie Devlin. And boy, they were twins, but boy, were they evil. Like, I'm not kidding when I say that. They were some pretty evil, probably the two most evil out of Frank's gang, probably besides him, I would say. Samantha Soul, who played Charlotte Temple, who was part of the who was part of LaBelle, one of the women of LaBelle. Luke Robertson, who played Bill Chick, who was also part of Frank's gang. Justin Welburn, who played Floyd Wilson. Tess Frazier, who played Callie Dunn, who was the love interest for Mary, actually, in the show. Where was I there? Samuel Marty, who played Truckee, who was Alice's son. Um, and then Iovi was just like, I believe was his grandmother, right? I do believe. Yeah. Um, and then we had, sorry, where was I? Rio Alexander. Did I write that down twice? Oh, I did. I wrote down Rio Alexander's name twice. Oh, sorry, my bad. Jeremy Bobb, who played A.T. Grigg, who was like the newspaper man. Kim Coates, who played Ed Logan, who was the head of security for J.J. Valentine, who was the new owner of Quicksilver Mining after the original owner was actually shot and killed by Frank and his gang. Surprise, surprise, when they were trying to steal some money. Jessica Sula, who played Louise Hobbs, who was part of a little community uh, just outside of oh my god, LaBelle. And yeah, they were like the Buffalo Soldiers is what they were known as, because they held back I guess quite a bit of they were in a pretty serious battle, and they, I guess the people who were after them or who were fighting them kind of said they were like cornered buffalo or whatever, the way they fought, and were able to hold off the enemy, right? So that's where they got their names from. Where was I here? Eric LaRae Harvey, who played Elias. Uh, Marceline Huguet, who played Lucy Cole. Elias. I'm trying to think of who Elias was now. Oh dear. Why can't I think of who Elias was? Anyway, Sam Watterson, who played Marshall John Cook, and then Christine Siddell, who played Martha. So there was a pretty big cast in the show, I will say that much. But we'll actually go back to the very beginning. So at the very beginning of the show, we start out in Creed, Colorado, where a group of men ride through a town that appears to have been through a battle. And then Marshall Cook is then pointed to a child hanging. So it looks like the city has been like burnt down, basically, and that everybody has been killed. So you know a pretty serious thing happened, and then you see the train derailment, and then like Marshall Cook just dropped to his knees when he sees the child has been hung. So yeah, there were definitely some darker themes in this show for sure. And yeah, it's not, some of it is definitely not like an easy watch, but it is a very good Western show. Like, and the final battle scene is just absolutely incredible. So yeah, like as we know, most Westerns kind of have that like same sort of I guess you could say like what's the like formula for for the show or the movie that is happening. Usually there's some sort of like big battle. I'm not saying that's all Westerns, but a lot of Westerns do follow that same sort of formula. But this was just like a show version of that. But I mean, over the 7 episodes, you really do get like a sense of what each character, like who each character is, and like you get more in depth with them too, right? I feel like in a show like this. So a wounded man shows up on horseback to a woman's farm at the same time as a group of men show up to Elias, oh my God, Elijah Graham's MD, with the leader, who appears to be wounded as well. The leader introduces himself as Frank Griffin. So that was the first time we ever meet Frank Griffin, and he didn't seem like too menacing at that point. But I mean, yeah, he was wounded, so I guess he maybe didn't have the same like oomph to him as he normally would. So one of the men outside, as they're talking, states that Roy Good is going to pay for Frank losing his arm. So clearly something happened between these two men, right? We know that much by now. So then Bill McNew then returns to LaBelle, a town that appears to be primarily women and does not appear to be welcomed with open arms. I'm not really sure why. There was some sort of thing that happened. Like, it looked like he was visiting his wife's grave at the very beginning, and it looked like he had lost her to maybe an unfortunate incident. I'm not really sure. They never really go like too much more into depth about that, other than the fact that he had lost her at some point in time, just before, I guess, all of this was taking place. So Frank then threatens so when they're leaving this little town they've visited to get to this doctor, when he's leaving, he threatens that if anyone is to take Roy Good in, they will suffer, the same way that he has suffered, I guess, sort of thing. So Frank finds Roy's dead horse along the trail while tracking him and must guess what direction he went with a 3-day head start. So basically, like the tracker that Frank has says, he could have gone east to this place. He could have even circled, or I think it was circled back and gone east. He could have gone north, and then it was kind of like a guessing game as to which direction Roy may have gone. And being 3 days behind, there's a lot of ground to cover, right? But yeah, somehow Frank has some good luck in this show. I'll just say that much. So then, just after that, Marshall Cook arrives in LaBelle looking for Sheriff McNew, telling him he's looking for Frank Griffin. Of course, McNew kind of thinks this is crazy because it seems that everybody knows who Frank Griffin is, and he seems to be some sort of like very formidable force, right? So then Marshall Cook tells McNew that he must go to the military for help after what Frank did in Creed, Colorado, actually, because I guess nobody else will go after him after what Frank had done there. Cook tells McNew that Frank has a new issue in Roy Good taking all of Frank's money in his last robbery. So now we're kind of getting into the story, right? Like the little, I guess, the meat and potatoes, you could say. So Frank had stolen from J.B. Sloan. That was the president that holds the claim to the Tomboy mine. So he was the original owner of the Quicksilver, Quicksilver establishment, whatever you want to call it. But he was a very powerful man and a very rich man, so obviously I could see why, Frank wanted to stop that train and steal from them. Now, they just shoot him immediately, and then Roy is able to take the money and run with it, sort of. So obviously, not the best scenario for Frank, and he wasn't obviously able to catch Roy, as we've learned a little bit earlier on. So now they're definitely on the hunt for him again. So I guess originally they had been separated from the Devlin twins, that was right, and then the Devlin twins were about to be lynched in Creed, and then I guess something possessed Frank to turn around, and before they could actually do the hanging, he ended up just going ballistic on the town with all of his men, and basically doing the same thing to them, like, yeah, so kind of a little bit crazy. So just after that little flashback with Marshall explaining everything, McNew comes to warn Alice of what has oh my god, I guess that is one page. What has happened with Frank Griffin, telling her Frank is looking for Roy Good. So of course she knows that she has Roy Good harbored there, right? At this point. And then that's when Roy turns himself into McNew, which leads us into episode 2, where the women of LaBelle are expecting the arrival of J.B. Sloan, but instead are met by J.J. Valentine to find out that Sloan has been killed. Valentine then introduces them to Colonel Farnsworth and his head of security, Mr. Logan. So now we're meeting the new owners of Quicksilver, and they promise to kind of like take care of everybody, sort of thing. But Miss McNew suggests being partners instead of, letting Quicksilver take over them completely. But the women vote against her, and Quicksilver ends up taking over anyway, because originally, she's just outvoted. So unfortunately, she's not going to be partners and get everything 50-50. I think it was like 90-10 or something, or maybe, I think it was 90-10. Was basically, so Quicksilver is basically owned by LaBelle at this point, which is unfortunate, not what Mary wanted, but it's what she ended up getting, because I think all of the women were just sick of having no men around after 2 years long, and there's no real, like, they weren't doing any of that work themselves, right? It seems that they had maybe dug a little bit, but I mean, compared to what they were doing when they had a full workforce that was, like on a daily basis, yeah, they're just not keeping up the same, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, yeah, they didn't have the same like capacity of people, obviously, to do the job on a day in day out basis. So they kind of need that again. So it's not a horrible thing to have somebody come in and retake over the mine. Maybe obviously the head of security there, Mr. Logan, was a little shady, but yeah, we find that out throughout the show for sure. But anyhow, other than that, I would say that they were pretty well taken care of right from the time obviously Quicksilver takes over. Uh, so where was I? Oh yeah, so a couple of men that night ride into town, and Bill McNew shows his weakness as Whitey has to take care of them and like scare them away basically. Um, so Roy then tells McNew the reason Frank is after him is because he considered him family, and Roy abandoned him. So it wasn't just all about the money, I guess. Obviously, Roy had been there from a young age, right? As we find out a little later on, and Frank had kind of taken over the position of being his father, because you know they didn't really. I guess all the family Frank really had, or sorry, all the family Roy really had was his brother. So when his brother left and then he left, it was basically like him on his own as a kid, right? So eventually somebody just ended up holding the position of taking care of him, I guess, and that person ended up being Frank. So he felt a little, I guess, betrayed when Roy decided to steal from him instead of, help him out. So McNew says he is going to track Frank and his gang to see where they are headed. So he wants to be able to help out Marshall Cook, obviously. Um, yeah. So then in the town that A.T. Grigg lives in, Frank ends up confronting him about what he's writing in the papers. Frank then tells Grigg to write that Roy Good betrayed him and that he will kill any man, woman, or child that harbors him. So, yeah, Frank's basically, at this point, threatened to basically do the same thing to any town or any place that's harboring him as he did in Creed, right? So then Bill sets out to help Marshall Cook bring in Frank Griffin, and then Alice comes to free Roy from his cell after McNew has left. Frank then tells a story of how he was attacked and killed and was taken in by a man named Mr. Haight. So I guess he's kind of following in the same footsteps as the guy who ended up taking care of him, right? Like he's kind of almost shadowing that in a sense. I think just because maybe he was so grateful for being saved himself that he kind of feels like he needs to do the same thing, but he's got so much trauma that he hasn't really dealt with himself that it's just kind of like, yeah, he's not really going about helping anybody the right way, right? Like it's a very odd thing. Like just he goes about it in such a very weird way. So Roy then has, so this is after he's been freed, right? And they go back to the ranch or whatever that she's on. So Roy asks Alice to teach him how to read in exchange for breaking in the horses, because as we've seen in the last episode, that Roy was actually pretty good with the horses. So she wants him there to obviously help around the farm, right? So McNew is kind of hot on the trail at this point, and he ends up stopping at a restaurant, and then a man who sells him glasses ends up pointing him in the direction of Frank, like saying that he saw him a few days ago and was playing like a game of, I think, poker with him, but then eventually just ended up leaving because he could see the situation was not going in a great direction. So he just decided to get out of there and keep his life, right? So Frank then gets assigned at the very end of the episode to travel north to Olagrand. So, yeah, I guess he's kind of getting signs along the way, and that's what I was saying. Like, it's kind of like somewhat luck. Like, he keeps his arm that was cut off with him the entire time, and it's like pointing in the direction he thinks he should go, which is just very weird. Like, it was almost like he was following all these very strange signs, and it just ended up leading him to Roy somehow. It was very weird, but it was just like all pure luck, I guess. So in episode 3, we start off with Manu comes to the gorge where Roy killed 7 of Frank's men. Now, I thought he had only killed like a couple of them because he said that Frank had 32 men and then went down to 30 that day. So it appears that he had 37 men and went down to 30 that day. So I guess Roy was maybe trying to kind of maybe play it a little less than what he had actually done. So maybe nobody thought he was quite as dangerous as he said he was, or was being portrayed to be anyway. So then McNew notices, holy crap, a lone man following him. McNew then confronts the man and asks him about like what he saw, sort of thing, because the man claims to have seen the gunfight between Roy and Frank's gang, but doesn't really give very much information. And the one thing that really stood out was that he said that McNew had lost his shadow, and I think one of the guys that was trying to take care of him in the very beginning of the show, like to help with his eyesight, also said the same thing, and something about it being like very dangerous to lose your shadow, sort of thing. Now I'm not really sure what they meant by that exactly, but yeah, I'm assuming like he was kind of like losing himself a little bit. Maybe that's what they meant. Especially after his wife died, right? Um, so Alice. So I think this is just after they had showed up at the farm, right, to come back and get Roy, who they don't know was Roy at the time, right? So Alice makes a deal with Miss McNew for the horses and stops Whitey from taking Roy back in. And then Marshall Cook ends up visiting A.T. Grigg, so he points Marshall Cook in the direction of Sister Lucy Cole in the town of Moses, who I guess basically raised Roy from a young boy. When the marshal leaves, he tells Grigg if he sees Frank again to tell him John Cook is coming for him, which probably wasn't maybe the smartest thing to say, especially when he's on his own. But I guess he kind of wanted to say, like, let Frank know that he's not the only threat that's out there, right? So the family that Frank camped with points McNew in the direction of Olegran. So yeah, this was just after Frank and his gang had been there. McNew runs into them, I think, the next day or whatever, on the same trail. And then Whitey sneaks off to take violin lessons from a girl named Louise. And I can't remember the name of the town that they called it where all the Buffalo Soldiers lived, but it wasn't. Yeah, I wish I could, but it was just like a small community of them. So yeah, it was cool to see. And I guess they really didn't want to be in LaBelle because they felt like they didn't really owe any of the people in LaBelle anything, and because they were free men now, right? Like they had served their time in the military, they were free, so it didn't really. Yeah, they were kind of like living their own life and trying to live off of the land themselves in their own community, which I can respect. I understand that. You want to earn it all for yourself. It makes sense. It's a good way to live life, right? Um, not relying on other people to help you through it. So yeah, good on them. Where was I? So Roy teaches Truckee how to ride a horse, and this was after Alice had actually said that Truckee was afraid of horses. So he teaches him how to ride one. So when Marshall Cook arrives in Olegran, you can kind of tell something is a little off when he enters the bar. And then Frank is already there waiting for him and kills him right there on the spot. And then he ends up finding the note with Lucy Cole's name on it. So now Frank kind of has like another heading as to where Roy may have gone. So that puts us into episode 4, where a flashback of the mine collapse is shown, and McNew then has to identify the body of the marshal after he was killed. And it's kind of crazy. Like, McNew was not very happy with what had happened. Like, he just goes, you let Frank ride in and ride out. But again, there wasn't enough people in that town to even, like, defend themselves, right? Like, Olegran, I think, maybe had, like, a handful of people in it at the time that they showed up. So, I mean, what were they going to do, right? Like, they kind of had to just sit back and let things unfold, I guess. So Frank and his gang end up stopping upon a house with a lady Lila who is taking care of them, who is taking care of a group of people with, I think, smallpox, she said, and Frank chooses to stay and help her. So that was kind of the one moment that I really thought stood out with Frank, where he was like showing that he was, had a good side to him, but yeah, he ends up having to bury them all. Now, I'm not sure, again, because he did have the Devlin twins stay behind with him for that. I'm not sure whether he did that on purpose, whether he killed them on purpose, or whether he just kind of let them all die, and then yeah, just buried them all out of respect. It kind of makes you think that he may have ended up just ending all of their lives on purpose, which is probably most likely what he did based on what the Devlin twins said in there. And there was that he was just going to get sick of it eventually, and he would just end up, dealing with it the way he always did. Um, so Alice has a flashback of nearly dying before Bill McNew came to rescue her, and this was, I think, when she almost drowned, and then she was almost killed again after that by I couldn't even tell you, like, just a group of men that ended up showing up in the woods. I'm assuming they were supposed to be native, but I'm not really sure. But anyway, Bill ends up coming in and helping her, and it seems like they had like prisoners too, so they take all of the children and whatever back to the man that was helping him in the beginning of the show with his eyesight. Uh, so yeah, so that was, oh, sorry. So yeah, Bill McNew came to a rescue. So Roy and Iovi and Truckee end up going out hunting, and when they do, when they get to their fishing spot after Truckee couldn't pull the trigger on the deer, Roy ends up finding a submerged carriage with safe inside, and then Roy has a flashback of Lucy Cole finding him and his brother Jim. So now we know his brother's name. And then McNew ends up making it to the house with all of the sick Frank was at, only to find all the graves in the backyard. So again, that was kind of a very eerie scene. And now you know that he's even getting closer to Frank and his men, right? So eventually you have the feeling that they're probably going to cross paths at some point. So in the next flashback, Roy's brother leaves to go find work, saying he will return, but never does. Or yeah, I don't think Jim ever did return. Now he did leave a note, but but Roy was already gone by that point, right? So yeah, and then just shortly after McNew finds the house, he ends up coming face to face with Frank and his men when he stops to cool off and get a drink. Frank leaves him alive, telling him it won't be the law that kills him. So again, Frank is still very set in his ways of, this is not how I'm going to die. It won't be you that kills me. But he could kind of tell that McNew was lying right from the beginning. And I was like, oh my God, there's no way McNew makes it into this. But Frank decided to keep him alive, I guess, because he didn't really obviously one man against 30 isn't really that much of a threat. And even if he was able to shoot like one or two of them, he ain't making it out of that situation alive. So yeah, and Frank had no fear of being killed by him. So why would he even care to waste his bullets, right? So Roy has another flashback of being put to death with Frank for stealing someone else's horses. Um, and then McNew does the same thing that Marshall Cook was going to do and goes to the military for help, but is shot down when they tell him that, unfortunately, they have orders that point them elsewhere. So even they won't go after Frank Griffin at this point because they don't really, I guess he's not like uh, high enough on their priority list, I suppose, I guess, to even bother. So it is kind of sad that Marshall Cook kind of ended up being killed by Frank and his gang for nothing, because even if he had have made it to the military, they probably wouldn't have even helped him at that point, which is kind of unfortunate. So it would now maybe if Marshall Cook had made it to the military, eventually McNew would have caught up with him, and they would have had maybe a bit of a better chance, but I still don't think they probably would have made it past all 30 of Frank's men. So then we get Frank arriving at the house that Lucy Cole used to live in, and it's occupied by some probably squatter or hermit, I'm assuming. And Frank is told that she's moved on and bought a saloon in Pashuka, I want to say, is how you pronounce that. So now they kind of have like another heading of where they could possibly go. So yeah, and then this was in the flashback where Roy chooses to leave Lucy, too, and then steals Frank's horse right in front of him not long after that, and that's when, that was the first time they had met, so that's when Frank, like, kind of takes him in after, I think it was after knocking him off the horse, right? I can't remember. Or does Roy just end up kind of, like, falling off the horse? I can't quite remember what happens in that scene, but yeah. Roy doesn't make it very far, let's just say that. So then we go back to the present time where Roy admits to Lucy that he doesn't feel right until either him or Frank is dead. I guess when he went back to Moses, it was to rebury his father, and I guess he was hoping that he would die beside him, sort of thing. So I think maybe he had been shot at that point too, right? Because in the altercation with all, like, Frank and his men, when McNew sees it, like, the aftermath, he goes back and, like, shows a little flashback where it was actually, like, happening in real time, when unfortunately, you know, Roy's horse wasn't going to make it, so he ended up having to kill it and used it as, like, basically, like a kind of like a blind almost, or like a setup for his rifle, and just ended up taking out a bunch of men. And then when he shot Frank, they of course ended up turning around because now Frank was wounded and they needed to get their leader some help. So as promised at the end of episode 5, Roy and Alice deliver the horses as promised, and then Alice offers her land to Miss Dunn because she doesn't want any part of it anymore, right? Like, she wants her and Truckee to go to Boston, and I guess Truckee says, you know, she says that a lot, but we never actually end up going, so it kind of seems like a kind of one of those things where she wants to do it, but, you know, she feels maybe kind of at home a little bit where she is, even though she doesn't want to admit it. Which leads us into episode 6, which starts with a flashback of Frank and Roy meeting the Devlin twins, who leads into what looks like a brutal murder scene. And, you know, most of Frank's gang at that point kind of goes, you know, this was caused by them, like it was their own family. So, yeah, they realize that the Devlin twins are lying, but Frank still wants to bring them in anyway because he feels sorry for them in some sort of way. Don't really know why, or maybe he thought he could save them or change them a little bit, make them into better men than the situation they had put themselves in there, obviously. So then we go to another flashback when Roy goes back to Lucy. She gives him the letter from his brother, and that's when she tells me, you know, he left it. We got this letter about a year after you left, which is crazy because it had been, I don't know how long before Roy ended up actually going back, and she was kind of like all excited because Roy gave her this big sum of money, and she was like, oh my god, I knew you'd be successful, sort of thing. But he ended up being like an outlaw, essentially, right, and had stolen that money from somebody else who was also an outlaw. So it wasn't really it was kind of dirty money, basically. And of course, Roy obviously wasn't going to admit that to her, and just ended up taking the letter and leaving. So then in the next flashback, it shows, I believe it was actually, Gats that ended up pushing Roy a little bit too far, asking him about the letter, and he was going to open it, but of course, Roy can't read, and that was the thing that was stopping him from opening the letter from his brother, because what was the point if he couldn't even read it, right? So he ends up pointing the gun at him, and then I think he ends up beating up one of Frank's other men, right? And then he ends up just riding off. So at this point, you can kind of see like a little bit of a uh, barrier between Frank and Roy at this point. So you can kind of tell that they're falling apart. More on Roy's side, I would say, just based on the fact of who some of the men that Frank is bringing in clearly. Um, So then, when Roy rides off to go after Frank in the present time, Alice and Truckee end up reading a letter because obviously Roy left it behind on purpose. Uh, so in the letter, he was asking Roy to come live with him in Atascadero, California, telling him about his wife and his son, who he had named Roy, obviously after his brother. So yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot to unpack in that letter, and now that Roy could read, I think that's probably where he was going to head. Obviously, after he had either killed Frank or Frank had killed him, in which case he wouldn't be going to see his brother ever, obviously. But he didn't feel right until he had ended that chapter, at least, right? So Frank finally reads about LaBelle in the paper after J.T. Craig after J.T. Craig had been there and had gone back to his town and then written a piece about them and pretty much led Frank right to them. Like, he caused that whole battle scene in the final episode, which is absolutely insane. Just, I don't know why he would even do that, but I guess he just wanted the news, right? Like, that's what he was there for, and obviously if there was a big, huge battle between the two of them, it would make for a great headline, right? And that's basically all he really cared about. Not the lives that were going to be lost on either side. It just mattered to him about making his bank, because ever since Roy and Frank had got into it, his newspaper was getting more popular. So obviously he just wanted to keep that ball kind of rolling. So the mine is then reopened, and things seem to be back to normal in LaBelle, but we all know now, thanks to J.T. Grigg, that things aren't going to remain normal, which leads us into episode 7, where the women find out that Mr. Grigg wrote a piece about them, finding out that Roy Good was hiding there, and then warning about Frank Griffin's arrival, obviously. So, yeah, now they know that things are going to go the way they... things are not going to go according to plan. Like, it's just not going to be a peaceful mining town anymore. There's going to be some things that happen that they have to prepare for. So the women in security with Whitey come to Alice looking for Roy. Of course, Roy's already left at this point. And Miss McNew hopes that making the town look dead when Frank arrives will just kind of make him move on and not really care about, burning anything down or trying to look for people or so on and so forth. And he'll just figure that Roy's moved on, sort of thing. And if the town's dead and there's nothing going on, there's no reason for him to stay there, right? Now, the horses that were just delivered ended up being released by someone, and no one is able to ride out of the town. So Miss McNew tells everyone to gather what weapons they can, and that was pretty much it. Now they kind of have to change their plan in order to defend their town, right? So Gats Brown, now they're getting closer to LaBelle, Gats Brown tells Frank he is worried about the Buffalo Soldiers living just outside LaBelle and thinks they should probably go check that out. Now, when they do, obviously a shootout occurs between all of them, and they end up killing all of the Buffalo Soldiers right there, including like any man, woman, or children that was living in that small community. So Roy then finds a security team with all the horses in the forest from LaBelle. Now McNew comes out of hiding to help Roy. Not that Roy really needed much help because he'd already shot one of them, and then he ends up shooting another one and says, I did that just because I'm so mean. So he's kind of living up to the name at this point, right? So, yeah, and this was like pretty much at the same time that Frank was meeting with the Buffalo Soldiers, and then that gets into the shootout and kills them all. Now, Whitey was able to save, oh my god, where's her name? Why can't I find her now? Whitey was able to save Louise and I think maybe her younger brother, if I'm not mistaken. But that was unfortunately the only two people that ended up living from that community. Uh, where was I here? Oh, uh, oh yeah. So Frank meets with a couple of those soldiers. Oh yeah. So I think it was it after the huge battle? And I mean, there were so many people killed. Whitey was pretty much killed right off the hop as soon as he opened the door after Frank and his men arrived. Uh, and the Shoshone warrior that had been following McNew the entire time, Roy ends up telling him that was a ghost. And I guess Roy can see him too, because I guess they were kind of crossing the gorge to get their some sort of some sort of water pathway anyway, or passage, and that guy I guess got washed away. So I guess McNew had been seeing a ghost the entire time, but it kind of makes sense because he only showed up when McNew needed help or when McNew was in some sort of danger, which made sense. It was almost like it was McNew's shadow back with him again, sort of thing. That's kind of another way to look at it, I suppose. Um, so McNew rides into the battle. I guess as the battle rages on. So the battle had already kind of commenced between obviously the women of LaBelle and Frank's gig at this point. McNew walks and only to find Whitey dead, which is unfortunate because Whitey seemed to be like a pretty good gunslinger and probably would have been very useful in that battle, but he opens the door thinking that he's just going to go out there and shoot somebody and then just gets like a throwing knife right into his chest immediately. So he didn't even make it like 2 seconds into the battle. I'm not even sure he made it past the first gunshot, to be completely honest. Which is unfortunate, but it doesn't really hit you until the very end of the episode. Just because it happened so fast, right? Um, so that McNew walks out to confront them all with Roy coming in on the other side of them. So now they're kind of like in this, like, they're boxed in basically. Now they end up getting like all of them end up getting killed, right? Like all of Frank's men, which is pretty much kind of a given based on the fact that they're out in like the middle of the street. Now some of them are able to ride into the houses and kill a couple of them, and I think they burn a couple buildings down. But other than that, they don't really do too much damage because like the whole town of LaBelle is on like either side of the street, just shooting from the rooftops, the windows, like so on and so forth. So they don't really have much of a chance to begin with anyway. So the town of LaBelle win the fight, but it appears Frank is not among the dead, so Roy still has to go after him. Now, Roy does kill Frank, but is shot himself. Now, obviously, that doesn't kill Roy. He lives. I don't think it was in, like, a very vital area. It was kind of looked like Frank shot him in the hip. Now, Frank does say that, this wasn't the way he was meant to die, obviously, when Roy kills him. But, Roy says, you saw wrong sort of thing. Like, this is how you're going to die, regardless of what you think. Just because I am faster than you, obviously, trying a gun. Now, there was one woman in the town that kept saying about this pastor arriving, and Whitey talked to her a couple times about it, but he never seems to show up. Now, after Whitey's death, I guess he finally does show up, so I'm not sure. He must have been held back by something. Not exactly sure what it was, but just this very powerful line at the end of the show that he says in the opening of his speech. And this is when Whitey's death definitely hits you. Like, even I cried a little bit. I'm man enough to admit that that definitely gave me some tears. So the pastor finally arrives in LaBelle and starts a speech with, "It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch." I don't know why that line just stuck with me, but no matter what, I think it's in the trailer of the show too. But yeah, just the way he opens that speech definitely sticks with you. So Roy then finally leaves LaBelle and Alice behind to travel to California, and Alice finds the money that Roy had left them at the end of the show. So yeah, you kind of get the sense that Roy finally is going to see his brother again. They don't show anything between him and his brother, I don't think. No, they don't. But yeah, you get a sense that where he goes is very close to where his brother lives. So he's going to be finally like reunited with his family again, or what's left of it anyway at this point, right? And now he's kind of obviously he's closed the chapter with him and Frank, and he's closed the chapter with him and Lucy Cole, and now he's closed the chapter with him and Alice. So everybody kind of can live happily and peacefully at this point, right? Because there's no more real big threat to any of the people around that area. So now Roy can go on and live his own life and doesn't have to have any worries or be looking over his shoulder anymore. So yeah, but a very good show with lots of action. Now I will say episodes maybe kind of 5 and 6, more 6 than anything, were a little bit of filler. But I guess it's kind of to give more of a backstory as to how, you know, Roy and Frank ended up falling apart. But I feel like this show probably could have been just 6 episodes. Not now, it's not bad by any means. Like, the show is good, but I just feel like that one episode was a little bit filler, and that's why I only ended up giving it a 9 out of 10. That's my, I guess, one gripe with the show, you could say. But other than that, yeah, a phenomenal show. Definitely worth more than one watch, obviously, because I've seen it 3 times. But won't be going back to visit it for a while because I've got so much more to go through. But anyhow, that is it for this review, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye for now.